So thank you guys for gathering again, and I just want to give you a big thanks to Bob Kincaid. This is Bob Kincaid, and we're gonna have a conversation today about the gospel and about where he is with his faith, and in ways in which he can, we just want to have a healthy, helpful dialogue and conversation about faith. And he'll tell you all about his background, but he comes from a Unitarian Universalist background, or at least background. That's where he is part of that church down in North Andover, and he's going to tell you more about that story. But that being said, Bob Kincaid, everyone, can we give him a round of applause? So, Bob, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Where do you live? Who's your family? And what do you do for a living? A lot of questions, but...
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here. Let's see, where did I grow up? I grew up in Connecticut. Near Danbury, Connecticut, a little town called New Fairfield. I was raised as a Methodist, so my parents, I've got two sisters, that's how, Methodist, Christian, that's how we were all raised. And what else do you say? So I live here in Plastow, so I know these guys, Dave and Eric and Brian, and we hang out pretty regularly. We know these guys from Scouts. And, so what was the other question? Where am I now?
Actually, so tell us about your family.
So my family, I've got two sisters, both a little bit older than me. I guess we're talking about faith. They and my parents have pretty much stuck with my parents' religion for most of their lives. It clicked for them. It made a lot of sense. For me, I tried. I went through it, and it didn't seem, it didn't click for me. In particular, the faith aspects of it. I tried. I tried to say, okay, I'm going to accept Christ and He's going to change my life, and you have to do this and therefore that. If you want to be saved, there is such a thing as being saved, heaven and hell, and if you do this, then you go to heaven, you get saved, and it transforms your life, but you have to believe fully and completely in Christ for that to happen. You can't just say the words, and I did it, but it never felt real inside. It never felt like, yep, I believe not only in God, but what are the characteristics of God that most Christian faiths believe? What are the characteristics of Jesus? And they are, in a sense, supernatural. They're not of this world. They're not, there's a magical element to it. Maybe that's not the
supernatural.
Right word. Supernatural. Yeah. And it didn't click for me. And I couldn't just go along with it just because it seemed like the right thing to do, because that's what my family was doing. That's what my sisters were doing. Right. So over time.
What was the dynamics of your family? So, two parents, obviously.
Yep.
And how many siblings did you have?
So I had two sisters. Tracy's 5 years older than me. Stephanie's 1 year older than me.
Yep.
They're the reason I'm here in the area. Tracy, my oldest sister, came here for college, met her husband. Then my other older sister kind of followed her up here. And then I graduated college. I'm like, where do I want to go? At that point, my parents had moved from Connecticut down to Virginia. I'm like, let's go where most of my family is, where my sisters are. So I followed the two of them up here, eventually settled in at a job. And then, of course, 5-7 years after that, they both followed their husbands back to where their husbands came from. So now I'm like, all right, I'm alone up here. So I got one sister in Minnesota. I got another sister in North Carolina. I got my parents down in Virginia. I met my wife. Her mother and sister moved down to Florida. So, no direct family, right in the area.
Like you.
Yeah, right. This is, family is all up here now, right?
I don't have that problem.
Yeah.
I'll let you.
So, tell us about your wife and kids.
So, my wife, Lauren, a couple years older than me. Let's see, she's awesome. She's my better half, and in my case, I think that's a
way better half.
Way better half, yeah. What else? She was raised Jewish. I think she was technically raised, there's different kinds of Judaism.
So Orthodox or Reformed? Do you remember?
Or secular.
Conservative?
Conservative.
Okay.
I think it was called conservative.
Okay.
But the way she described it, it wasn't actually conservative. I think they just feel like they like to go with a certain way, but the way that her mother, raised her through this, I don't feel like it was a
It's more cultural,
literal-
right?
more
Yeah.
cultural identification as a conservative Jew, but not necessarily a stickler for all the particular rules
Right.
about how you have to eat and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
So that's my wife. We have 3 boys. My son Sam is 12, and I've got twins, Skylar and Lucas, that are they just turned 9.
And where did you go to school?
I was raised in Connecticut and went to school in upstate New York, RIT.
You guys heard of RIT?
Yep.
Very good school. Bob's a smart guy.
Went to school for printing management of all things, just because why not? I did it in high school. So I can go to school for business or I don't know what else. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, but I was familiar with printing, so I'm like, let's go to school for
Yeah.
printing. It's like one of those 2 schools in the country that you can go to school for printing. And I actually sort of kind of am in the same interest. I'm in publishing now, so.
So what do you do as a work for a textbook company, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't brand themselves as textbook anymore, but that's what you all know them as. If anyone's familiar with school books, Houghton Mifflin was one brand, and the other was Harcourt, and they merged about 8 years ago. So there's Houghton Mifflin and Harcourt. A couple years ago, we bought a division from Scholastic. They're intervention business, so they do intervention stuff, which is like where you come out of a regular classroom and you need intervention to get back on track. So we do materials for that. So we do all kinds of math, reading, science, social studies, intervention, all that stuff. It's a combination of print and digital. It's certainly not all print. Everybody is using some level of integration with digital. So we're trying to be where our customers are. It's definitely a changing place to be. But I'm a project manager there, so I work on new initiatives, bringing books out to Texas. We're doing a campaign, or California, or Florida, or a national campaign. So I work on coordinating all the logistics for that.
That's great. And you work from home, right? You're
Yeah.
a home guy, but you'll travel and go different places if you need to.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky that over time I've negotiated this deal. I work from home 4 days a week and go into Boston on Thursdays. So I get that lovely 2.5 hours in, 2.5 hours out. Anybody who
Yep.
commutes to Boston, it's
Yep.
rough.
If there's any evidence that we need Jesus, it's the traffic in Boston. So you were telling us a little bit about your church experience and stuff like that. So tell us about the process. Everyone familiar with the United Methodist Church? You guys familiar with that? Okay, so the Methodist Church is in the tradition of John Wesley and George Whitefield. It started as a result of the ministries and the Great Awakening in the 1700s. And it over time formed into Methodism because there was a method to the discipleship that they had. And so generally speaking, Methodists are in the spectrum. They're on they're Protestant, right? Because John Wesley and George Whitefield were Protestant. And they're typically considered Orthodox in their Christian beliefs. They may not be on the, we'll say, Calvinistic side. They're more on what would be considered more the Arminian side of theology. Their presence is all over the place. So you see Methodist churches, right? They're pretty much in every corner and nook in our country. And it's, matter of fact, did you know this? That the largest Methodist church in the world is in Korea.
I did not know that at
And
all.
it's,
I
I
would guess Texas.
want to say it's 100,000 people. So anyhow, it's just interesting. Methodism is all over the place, and there's a lot of Korean Methodists. But so that's a little bit about Methodism, and so they're almost like Episcopals and almost like Catholics in a certain sense, where there's stages of faith that they have. But so tell us about that process.
So I think a lot of different faiths, Christian faiths, you go through some kind of process when you have some kind of coming of age, youth group. You're 11, 12. What do you call it?
It's like confirmation in the Catholic Church, right? Because you're Catholic.
So
Yeah.
something to that effect. I think a lot of
Yeah.
it's very common that you ask the youth to try to define for themselves what they believe. So I went through that process and I did it, and I saw my sisters in the way that they did it, and they were all in. They were full-on believers, as my parents were, and I never got that bug. I never got that, yep, Christ is is an actual person who was literally the Son of God and divine, and it never clicked for me in that way. So that was kind of, I think, maybe where it kind of first initially started. Is I felt like I wasn't being totally honest. If I'm in feet, feet first, I'm not feeling like I'm being truly. I'm not quite there. So then, they had a youth group, and you learn about things like, what does it mean to believe in Christ? You accept God as your Savior, and then by doing that, you'll get access to heaven, and you have to do that, but you also have to believe it fully. So those kinds of things. I'm like, well, I can say the words, but it's not there. That the faith isn't there. So then you go to college, you meet different people from all kinds of different faith traditions and backgrounds. And again, I'm looking at my sister, and she's like involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and she's like totally gung ho, and like, that's not me. That's not where I'm headed. So I got involved in a dorm that did community service, and that was great. I loved it. I stayed in the dorms all 5, ended up being 5 years. So that was my home away from home at college, and so but again, you get a lot of exposure to different worldviews and theologies and religions when you go to college, and then coming out of college, it was, where do I want to live? What am I going to do for my job? And I ended up following my sisters, like I said, up here. And then, didn't bring I didn't get married in college, so I was looking for a spouse. I ended up meeting my wife through a social club a couple of years back. And my wife is Jewish. Did I mention that yet?
Yeah.
So
she calls herself a Jew, because the Universalist Unitarians are UU, so she calls herself a Jew. I thought it was funny. Anyhow,
it rhymes.
It rhymes, yeah.
So and being, so that worked. I was open to that because I wasn't a Christian in the same sense that my family was. So I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And she wasn't like a hard line. I think she generally believes in God, but I don't know what the traditional Jewish definition of God is, so that was totally fine. It was compatible, but there was pieces of my religion from growing up that I liked a lot about the community aspect, the support aspect. There's people that are there for you. You learn all kinds. You're encouraged to be a better person, to live your life in a certain way. So there's a lot of things that you get from a church. But with my background and having lost, I didn't have the faith in Jesus, and with her background, she never had the faith in Jesus. And I was like, well, what can you do if you want to raise a family, if you want to have that religious experience without being in a Christian church? So we found Unitarian Universalism, and how to describe Unitarian Universalism. Eric and I have had this conversation a couple times because people don't get it. There was the Unitarians and the Universalists. The Unitarians, as you might suspect, were, you had the Trinitarians and the Unitarians, and the Trinity, what the Trinity is, and the Unitarians were like, well, there was Jesus and there was God, but it wasn't a Trinity thing, and I couldn't explain it to you all that well.
Yeah, it's so in the 1700s, kind of the Age of Enlightenment had happened. Rationalism was sweeping through Europe and America, and what happened is there's a shift towards what we call deism. And you think of the founding fathers, Jefferson, Washington, among others, Ben Franklin. They're all deists, which essentially they thought that God kind of set, the cosmic clockmaker, sets it in motion, and then it just runs on its own course. So he has no intervention or whatever. He's just kind of on the outside. So Unitarians don't believe that Jesus is God or the Spirit is divine. They don't believe in salvation by faith through grace. They don't. Heaven and hell are kind of really not part of their faith system. So that's what the Unitarians are.
Well, yeah, it was a reaction to Trinitarianism, right?
Exactly.
So there was a schism, I think, back in my church is very old. It's in North Andover, and I think there was a split, 1600, 1700. Eventually, they formed the Unitarian Church as distinct from the Trinitarian Church.
Yes.
But there was, in many ways, I think there was still a belief in God, a still belief in Christ as divine, and they were a very popular, well-known, common religion all over New England for a couple hundred years, I think. And then separate from them, there was the Universalists, and Universalists basically said, I think, yeah, there's a heaven and a hell, but we don't believe that a loving God would send anybody to that bad place. I think was you kind of sum it up that way. So there was the Unitarians and the Universalists, and then it came to a time where they were both kind of struggling a little bit, sometime around the middle, 1950s, and they said, well, we're kind of similar in our outlook. We tend to be, quote, liberal in our congregants' approach to things. So it just makes a lot of sense for us to join forces as join churches, and there's enough commonality in the theology that could work. So it did. So that those two groups merged in the 50s, and then ever since then, I think it's evolved ever since to where if you don't have a particular theology, if you don't necessarily believe in Christ, if you've had some other experience, you can be a UU. And there's no religious test or theology test. It's not to say that anybody can be a UU, but but it's pretty loose.
What's the motto? No creed? Is that what it is?
So we have principles and sources, and I pulled them up if I wanted to talk about them. But it's not like it's not a cradle religion. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between a creed and
a confession, or there's some kind of statement of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are principles and sources and guidelines. Believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We believe in doing good stewardship of the earth and taking care of the earth that we've got, and then there's a whole bunch of them. Yeah. So there's a foundation of stuff, but it's not based on a God or a Jesus. Who with God or Jesus, you get these things. It's more based on. They don't say this explicitly.
Kind of humanistic principles.
Exactly, humanistic. Yeah. So I consider myself a humanist, Unitarian Universalist. I look at it from the worldview of we as humans have to make what we want of the world.
Mm-hmm. So that being said, what's been your experience with the Bible? Have you read the Bible? How is that?
Not for a while.
Okay.
I'd like to say that I had. I think. There's stories in the Bible that I think it's tough to. I don't know what you believe on the literalism of everything in the Bible, but from my perspective, certain things like the world was literally created in 7 days seems pretty unrealistic to me. Jonah and the whale is one story that pops up. That seems pretty unrealistic to me. I believe that there was a flood, but that it covered the world, I don't think it probably covered the world. So I think that there's a lot of stories in the Bible that are probably more like parables, like how to live your life and get a good moral lesson out of them, but not necessarily literally true. And there's other things that are probably literally true and historical, but I don't think the whole thing is literally true. But I haven't. I know that it's a good source of a lot of good information about how to live your life if you do that, but I can't say that I do that very often, or haven't really opened the Bible in quite a long time.
Sure. So is it safe to say that you haven't necessarily done have you read through the whole Bible I
don't think I've ever done that. I mean,
a Tolkien novel or something?
Yeah, I mean the closest was late high school, and
Gotcha.
then at some point after that, I was probably in some kind of a Bible study group briefly.
Gotcha.
But I couldn't. It's been a long enough time ago that I don't remember too much.
Sure. So what are some so you talked about some things that maybe are questionable. What are some things that you think are really that's true, or I believe it, or?
Well, I think there's been a movement over the last couple of years that Jesus wasn't even a historical person that literally existed, and I just think that's ridiculous. I think that they say, well, you look at the historians of the day, and there's certain ones that don't even say that he. I think that's crazy. He was absolutely a real person, and he did real good in the world, and he was a good teacher, and he showed a good way of living life, and he kind of was a great model. But I just don't. I don't take the one next step from there to say that he was necessarily divine per se.
Or resurrected.
Or resurrected, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Andrea.
All right. Who is God to you?
That was my next question. You cannot be stealing,
I'm sorry.
Andrea. You gotta stop reading my mail.
Guys, need to switch place.
That was gonna be my next question. obviously there's the God of the Bible, right?
Yeah.
We that we would here at Cornerstone believe in. So where's your thoughts on God and some ethereal being or maybe even deistic kind of approach? What's
Yeah.
your thoughts on God?
So, there's been lots of different religions throughout history, and they all, here's a definition of God or Christ, or, there's lots of different interpretations over time. To me, it's like, I think the common element is that God is all-knowing, all-powerful, he's wise, he's good. He's of such a nature that you can't even kind of quite describe what he is. He's not human flesh and blood like we think of, but I don't know what he is per se. He's just like this presence out there in the universe. But and I would be open to believing that. I haven't seen something about the way my mind works. I couldn't, like I said, when I was growing up, I couldn't, it didn't seem right to me to say I believed something if I didn't believe it in my heart. So I never quite connected to, is God literally this all omniscient, what's the word? He's
Omnipresent.
He's omnipresent, he's been around forever, he's all-knowing, he sees all things. Everything happens according to his will. I couldn't connect that because I didn't see evidence of it. So maybe there's evidence there, but it didn't work for me.
Where would you look for evidence if there was going to be evidence of that?
Like something tangible that could be proven with science, like, like you can say, I believe in a certain thing and it led me to do a certain way and it led my life in this direction and it was good and it was really God behind the scenes, God or Jesus, and because of my faith in God or Jesus, that was what led me in that direction. And I would say, but how do you know that it was God doing that and not just you as a human acting in human nature and doing what made sense for you? I don't know if that answered it.
Yeah, so I guess
You can follow up if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up question. If we're gonna be
Andrew, there's another chair over there.
So, what do you feel like your purpose is on this earth? Like for you, God is a question. I mean, I think all of us have that because we can't see him.
Yeah.
So like, what do you feel your purpose is?
Well, for me, it's, I've got kids, so that makes it real easy. Raise them up as best as I can and try to put them out in the world and have them be good, moral people that are going to contribute in some way to society and have good lives. So that's a huge undertaking right there. But also just to, I think we're here for a very limited space of time in the grand scheme of things. So with the very limited influence that we have, try to do some good in the world and try to, I don't know, do something meaningful that, but I think I look at it more of a meaningful, like what can I do on such a small scale to bring, to impact the broader world. What direct actions can I do to be a good person or to help the world be a better place?
So how would you so you're using the words like good person and stuff. So what is a good person and how what can you justify what makes something good or not good?
The way you treat people, just kindness. I think if you think about what things that stick in your mind as far as what defines morality and goodness, Eric and I and Brian are all in Scouts, so we could all recite to you the Scout law, so, and I do this with my kids all the time because it's so tangible and real and it's so easy to remember. You're not being kind right now. You're not being courteous. You're not being respectful. You're not being whatever, and I try to use that in teaching them. So it's these kind of particular ways that you live your life and treat other people.
Would you say you believe that deeply?
I think so. Yeah, I believe deeply that I want to be a good person. I want to be a better person. I want the world. I think what I believe most deeply is it's not all about me. It's I'm just one person. It's about my family, my wife, my kids, the community I'm in. I don't want to just look at it from my perspective. And I think the world would be better if we all looked at it as not what can I do for myself, but what can I do for broader society, and how can I live life in a way that's going to have a positive impact.
So I guess my just maybe a little just pushback on you is that something that is provable, your beliefs?
I think that, well, you know, I believe in democracy. I believe that, you know, we collective humans working together can build societies that are good and moral and just and fair. And is it provable? I think it's provable in the sense that if we're successful, we have good societies that treat each other well and kindly and have purpose, and you know, we don't destroy the environment, and we live in a sustainable way, and we treat each other with respect, and you know, we care about justice. So the way the proof of that would be if we're all doing it together, and if we're all thinking about each other as part of a bigger collective, then society around us will be better.
So maybe to restate the question is, so on the one hand, I can understand how it's difficult to have faith claims from some other, let's say, external source, like let's say the Bible, that where it's kind of a self-effacing word that's from God, or at least is claiming to be from God. God had said these things. For instance, you know, I am love, and you know, I want to give my life for God's people, or for the world in a certain sense. That there is such thing as right or wrong and all that sort of stuff, with certain parameters, right? That are prescribed, and the love that is kind of not contrast, but that's kind of presents the canvas for His love, for God's love. So that's kind of God telling His story in multiple ways throughout the Scriptures. Yeah. And so I can understand how you could. It's kind of easy to play skeptic, because it's like, well, prove that. You can't prove that. Like science doesn't prove it. But I guess my point is that no matter what we believe, I don't think it can be proved, like scientifically. Yeah. Like, does science, like, did you go to science to be like, all right, tell me how to be a better person, or help me understand why this is good or what good is even. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Science talks. The scientific method, I think, there is a scientific method, and it's, you know, you as scientists, you come up with a theory, and then those get peer reviewed, and there's a process to it.
Sure.
Right. But that's a whole different ballgame from philosophy and ethics, right? So where does philosophy and ethics come from? Right? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, like if or maybe this is the question: is do you believe in universal truths, any kind of universal truths, or universal morality?
Universal truths, universal morality. Yeah, I mean, I think that universal morality. I mean, just to boil it down, overly simplistic is people should be good. People should treat each other well. Golden rules should treat each other as we want to be treated, and then if we do that, society as a whole will be better. I do have a vision for what society. You know, humans have been here for how many thousands of years. Personally, I think that, you know, we're doing some damage to the environment. We're using up resources. I'd like to see us not using up so many resources, not damaging the environment as much, so that humans can be here on the planet many thousands of years from now, because in the time scale on the Earth, we haven't been here that long, but yet we've made a huge impact in the last 100 years, and I'd like to see us think a little bit about long-term future.
Sure. And I agree with you on those things. I guess my question is can those are beliefs, but can they actually be justified and verified? For instance, like, what makes something good? Or something bad? You know what I mean? So who's to say?
Who's the ultimate authority?
Exactly.
If there is no ultimate authority, why is it good all by itself? I don't know. I guess that's the tricky part, right? What's the ultimate?
A lot of that's based on perspective. And the story that came to mind is I was thinking of the pioneers that came over and first touched down in like Nova Scotia. And they were from Europe. And those people had been drinking milk for a long time, and they brought milk over to Nova Scotia.
Like Vikings, right?
Yeah, it was the Vikings, but there was one of the things that they did was they wanted to trade with them, so they gave them milk, not knowing that the natives to Nova Scotia had lactose intolerance. So they thought they were doing a good thing by sharing some quality stuff for them, and their perception was, you're trying to kill us.
Yeah.
So, what's good, what's not good.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, because to a certain extent it's about perspective.
Yeah.
Cultural differences, one thing is acceptable, other thing isn't. There isn't a norm. I think that's probably what you're trying to
Well,
point,
yeah,
right?
yeah, because at the end of the day, this is what have found interesting. Just in philosophy, is philosophers have really come to a concession in recent years that almost nothing is provable.
In philosophy.
Well, no, just provable. Period.
Yeah.
So there's a certain sense where you can't prove to me that we're not in a dream right now.
Yeah.
Right, it's a kind of a thought experiment kind of thing. But so anyhow, but that being said, with the, what's that? No, I'm sorry. Did you?
I said, why bother exist?
Oh well, that's a whole other question. Just hold on one sec, Lee. So I was just going to say, so there's a certain kind of like we can all at a certain level kind of loosen up on the fact that there's what is provable. That even word needs to be defined really well because. Something that is convincing to one person may not be convincing to
I think
another.
we're totally seeing that in our politics
Right.
now because we're so divided politically, and yet
Right.
if you really tend to solidly identify as a Republican or solidly identify as a progressive or a Democrat, you're gonna believe the sources that you like and trust.
The echo
And
chamber, right?
It's
Yeah.
frustrating
Yeah.
to me that
It's called the Tom Brady effect. People either hate him or
yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Lee. Yeah.
There's a and more into that is even with science there's the problem of the criterion, where like how do you know you have knowledge? What is your criterion? And what's your criterion? How do you know like that those criterions are even true? And you can get into infinite regress where nothing is knowable because there's no universal standard of which you can even measure the fact that you know you have knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, the best you can, as far as me, for what I'm concerned, my faith is really built on like being consistent and true to my experiences.
Yeah.
The best I know them because all I can know is that I exist.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's true. I've seen the movie The Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
People have said, like, respected scientists, people like Elon Musk has gone out on a limb and said, well, there's a high probability that we're actually living in a matrix because X, Y, and Z. Okay, but you can't live your life. I can only, for all I know, I'm like a crazy person in a hospital. I don't know.
Yeah. We're living in a movie, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Each of us lives our lives assuming that the reality that we see is the same reality that everyone else is in. So I can only assume that I'm living on this earth and it is, for me, what it is for you, and we're all experiencing the same thing, and it's true.
Right.
But I think, the history of sociology and governments and societies, I think certain ones do well, and they treat their people well, and people are happy, and they have good quality of life. There's metrics for what your quality of life is, and I think that ultimately we're doing well and good if people are, if there's fairness, and if people are living well and not struggling too much, not too much, certain bit of struggle is good in life, but you don't want to live your life constantly in struggle. But so I think as a society we're doing good if our people are, if it's fair. So look at how do you define fair if you don't have a God defining that for you? That's
Or an external constant, right? That's kind of part of it.
And
So,
I think societies and countries and religions have defined this over time, and to me it seems like they've evolved to, for the the ones that do well are the ones that treat their citizens well, and where their people are happy.
I would push back on that, yeah, because I would say that there's a lot of things are cultural. So that's one thing, right? So like even Christianity, the way Christianity looks at America is different than it looks in other places. Same thing for Hinduism, same thing for Islam or Buddhism. And I think you could actually trace most of world history through the might makes right kind of a principle. So I would kind of push back to say that I think it's more of a devolving than evolving a lot of times.
Yeah.
My personal view is I don't think humans are progressing morally.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Is that? I mean, maybe there's hope for it, right? But I think if you look at the evidence.
Yeah. I don't want to get into politics.
No. Yeah, it's fine.
You know.
Let's stay out of politics, but look at
history.
world history and current history.
I mean,
Are we as a human race progressively becoming better or good?
I don't know that we are. You know. How to say this? I mean, I think what comes to mind.
Well, we already
Yeah, right, exactly. We have a problem there, right?
Yeah,
Actually,
but we want good role models nationally, and sorry, I don't personally think that.
It's a safe space, brother.
you can say it. Go ahead. You can say
I
it.
personally
Yeah.
think that Donald Trump is a good role model in many ways, and I think I think that as a country you can agree politically with the Republican or Democrat or whatever, but I think that the fact that so many people like him, to me, is a sign that because just focusing on the personality aspects, there has been infidelity in his marriage and things that I really abhor personally. You got to be true to your family. You got there's certain things. So that bothers me, and the fact that that so many people put all that aside and say he's great because whatever, I didn't want to go there, but yeah, that's kind of what popped into my mind.
Gotcha.
Question mark.
Sure. Megan, did you have a question?
I'm trying to think if it even makes sense. So,
Let us decide.
okay, this might be kind of a stretch, but this is where I'm at in my head. So I used to teach science, and what we would always talk about, you brought up the scientific method and things like that. We always talked about how science was measurable, observable, and reproducible. And I taught in a Christian school, so we talked about this in light of like creation and theories of evolution and different things like that. Just how everything comes down to, like you could pull any scientific fact out or theory or whatever, but it comes down to things like for example creation. We can't reproduce it. We can't. I'm
Or
sure
the Big
science-
Bang, or whoever
for
in
years,
science,
yeah.
right?
I mean, God is not
Right.
gonna. I mean, he could, but he's not gonna. We're not gonna create the world again, or not now. Later. Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think scientists have yet recreated the petri dish gel of goo that supposedly created life, however many
Right.
millions
But like
and millions of years ago.
to have it come out of nothing, and even evolution, we can only see it on a micro level. We can't see it on did I say that right?
Yeah.
We see microevolution for sure, but like on the grand scale of like fish becoming birds or that kind of thing, we don't see. And we can't reproduce it. It's something that in its theory in itself is over that millions.
Millennia.
Right.
So everything that we base, even just that one thought of where the earth come from, is there really supernatural, being that, I can't think of the right word. Never mind. Sorry. So all of that, whether you believe in creation, whether you believe in evolution, whether you believe in, I don't know, mythology or whatever, all comes down to faith. So you are choosing something to base your beliefs and your thoughts on. As Christians,
And you would say, like, even in science, right? Because you haven't seen in the
Absolutely, like-
microscope, you're trusting people that've done the research and done the studies, that they didn't make it up, right?
yes, because there are just certain things that cannot be those three things.
Right.
And a lot of religion falls under things that we can't see or reproduce or even measure. so when we talk about like doing right for the environment, which I totally like, everything that you stand for, I totally agree with. There, I think that we should do good for others around us, and that kind of thing. The problem that I'm kind of working through in my head is like, Eric and I and our family, we believe that the Bible is our standard of truth. So when Jesus says to love your neighbor as yourself, and to take care of the widows and the orphans, and and that's 2 things out of so much, but like that is where we get our moral code, yes. So you have people like, I'm just gonna use you because you're here, but like you who, even like you said, the Boy Scout things and things like that, like are all, it's good character, and we value that in our home, and we think that's good. But then you also have people on the other hand who their moral code or moral foundation is so skewed from what we would consider is right, or what you would consider is right. And when I look at that all comes down to, like what you're saying, and even I see this is where I'm like falling apart. But like what you are valuing and what we are valuing, to me is when I think of it, I think of selflessness, because you're thinking of others, you're thinking of not just what I can get out of life right now. You're thinking ahead for the earth, and for our kids, and government, and culture, and society, and all of that kind of stuff. That's a very selfless viewpoint to me. I think the Christian life, if you are living it properly, is giving of self, because that's what Jesus did.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have people who their faith and their belief and their what directs their choices and their values is completely the opposite. It's completely selfish. So like, you don't agree with Donald Trump, and I'm not bringing him up to like start an argument because I can't do political arguments, but he thinks he's doing a pretty good job,
Yeah.
and he thinks he's doing right.
Yeah.
So if we are picking like, I don't even know if I'm coming to a point.
If it's
but, like,
subjective,
Yeah.
if
Which
it's
one's right, yeah.
so subjective, because we are human beings, and we can be selfish, we can be evil, we can be loving, we can be kind, in the right, how are we going to develop a culture where we see progress, and we see
progress, right? Defined
Yeah.
as a group, right?
when
Whatever that
we
means.
have such divergent.
If everyone's operating from a different platform, how are we ever going to reach consensus?
So like, they think they're building a better world because they, I don't know, I can't even think of an example of something that we would not agree with. Or different things like that. I mean, look at Hitler. He thought he was right, and that.
And everyone else did, right up until they didn't.
Yeah.
So,
So do
what
you have
I'm
a,
saying
you
is
have a
like,
question?
how can there be so many different standards of truth? And there aren't. So like, how can you know that what you're doing and your mindset and goals are the right one? Does that make sense? Like what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not
How do I
just
know?
just the overall, like, when
Yeah.
you look at it, like, and I mean.
How does someone who doesn't have faith in Jesus per se know that what they're doing is right without the objective truth of believing the Bible is absolute?
But I'm not even, I believe the Bible is truth.
Yeah.
For sure. And I want others to believe that too. But like, when you're looking at it overall, like
What the Bible does is it has an exterior agent that separate from humans, and humans who are flawed and subjective, and they disagree. And if morality only comes from this pool of humans, and not from something that's more tangible, but we have it in Christianity, we have it in the Bible. But where is the anchor point for morality if
there we
everyone
go.
just
For culture as a
Morality
whole.
change,
Like,
that's what I was thinking of.
Okay. Oh,
We're actually
interesting,
changing.
right.
Society's decided before that we thought this was right, now
Like
it's
slavery.
wrong,
Great,
now this
great
is
example,
right,
yeah.
and now this is wrong. And that's, to me, like a never-ending, you're never really getting anywhere because there's nothing to define what's actually right and wrong other than the people at that time and what influences them. And if you look at cultures around the world, we're all going to disagree on certain points, and some of those are big points. Like if you look at the you know, some of the, you know, extreme Muslims who would call America like the Great Satan, you know.
But in their culture,
In
they're
their
doing the right
culture,
thing.
They think
Yeah.
what's right is destruction of the evil empire, you know. And they would look at all of us and say, if we could wipe you off the map, that would be the best thing for the world. And do you know what I'm saying? So at some point, I look at like, how do we define that? How do we define, if we're going to say that we have to figure out what's right, apart from someone who's not flawed, because we probably all at least agree on that point that we're all flawed. So if you agree that a bunch of flawed people
Aye.
are going to have to work out the problem, that's a never-ending problem that I don't see going. I don't see how it can go forward. You know, I think that it always it's a catch-22. It's a never-ending cycle that can never actually correct itself.
I think you
Because
just hit
there's
the
always
nail on
going
the
to be
head.
destructive elements in the process, and disagreements, you know, between cultures. It's just, you know, but in theory, I think it's in theory I think it's a noble thing, you know. But I don't see how it in actuality can ever work itself out. You
Well,
know.
thumbs
So my
up.
question was,
Yeah.
and these guys are all saying the same thing, is how do we get to that point? How do we get to that point where we're actually in agreement on what is actually right?
Well, that's a big. We're kind of running out of time here. I have one question that I wanted to ask him before. Can I do that? And if we have time, we can circle back to that, or maybe
We can, I have to head out in a minute anyway.
pick that up. So, okay, you're coming back next week, right? He's coming back next week, and we're going to continue the conversation. So I just to kind of come towards a conclusion here, you've a few times have talked about Jesus and the message of Jesus. Articulate to us what's the gospel or the message of Jesus that you think we're
From my perspective.
yeah, from your perspective.
I think Jesus was he lived in a very different time, and he was, there was a lot of political turmoil at the time then, just like there is now, and different, oppressive state regimes and bad stuff going on. And I think that he came in and was a moral teacher, and he tried to say, here's how to live a good life, and here's kind of the characteristics of that. And I don't know enough about his life. I really don't know enough about his actual day-to-day life.
Sure.
He was a carpenter up until a certain point in his life, and then I'm not sure when and why he transitioned to being a spiritual leader, but he eventually...
His mom kicked him out of the house. No, it's a joke, people. It's a joke.
When he was 30.
He was 30. He had a good number of years first.
Sorry, continue. Yeah, you're saying. Yeah.
So did he know the whole life that he was the Son of God, and he was a divine? I don't know if he did.
Elijah, yeah.
But eventually he came to that conclusion, and he said, I'm going to show people how to live a certain way. And he wanted them to, and he tried to live a certain kind of a life, and and then eventually he attracted followers to him because he said, I don't think he attracted followers, I don't know how it came to be. I actually don't know enough.
Okay.
But I think he attracted followers who saw that he was a good moral leader. And if you live a certain way as Christ did, then that's a good thing. If you can follow him and follow his example and live your life in that way.
Would you be shocked if I told you that that's not what we believe?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
If I may. So actually, it's fascinating because that what you're. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
And that there is a kid. I don't know. Hell is hell in that word?
You can no. Go
Say
ahead.
hell. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a heaven and there's a hell and there are actual literal
Yeah.
places, and heaven is really cool and everybody wants to go there and you're there forever and you don't have to worry about anything, and hell is really bad and there's fire and there's torture and I don't know what it is. But if you don't want to go to the bad place, you want to go to the good place, and if you believe in Christ in particular, and if you turn your life over, it's not just a matter of saying the words, it's a matter of living life a certain way. And if you do that, you'll be saved, and your life will be better for it.
Okay, so I'd say there's some there's a lot of you're on the right track.
Okay.
You're on the right track. What we believe in, what we believe the scriptures teach is that that from the get-go, as God created us, not from a get-go, but
We have a gecko.
it's not Geico here, that from our creation, and our God he's obviously personal, right?
Yep.
He's omniscient, he's omnipotent,
Yep.
he's omnibenevolent, and he actually created us to have fellowship with us and to share his joy, and we rejected that. That's the whole garden story, right? And decided to say we're going to actually try to chase after our own godhood.
Like I'm doing.
Well, and here's the truth: is that we all are, right? We all are by nature, and that's actually in our nature. Is that this rebellious spirit against him is in our hearts, and so regardless of all of the love that he's shown us, the grace that he's shown us, the care that he's shown us, we're constantly rejecting him. And so in the garden we rejected him, but he actually pursued us in love and grace. And he actually promised from the garden to become like us or become one of us and die in our place. It's actually in Genesis 3:15, it's this awesome promise that God gives that from the offspring of the woman there's going to be a seed that's going to crush the serpent's head.
Yep.
And so the whole Bible story is the playing out of this promise of him becoming one of us and dying in our place, and taking all the repercussions of our rebellion, which would be judgment, and actually putting himself in the dock, as it were, and becoming sin, being judged for us, and then rising from the dead in order to forgive us. So it's actually this the way we look at the scriptures, we believe the scriptures is that it's God's self-sacrifice in our place, even though we deserve judgment, and we those who believe and repent are forgiven. So there's a lot of similarities to what you had said, but what I found fascinating. This is what I've never been able to get over. As much as we all have our moments of doubt, don't we? Mm-hmm. We all have and there's no perfect faith. It doesn't exist. There's only a perfect God. Like that's what we would say, right? There's only a perfect Jesus, right? And so even in my biggest times of doubt, biggest times of like, you know what, maybe this is all made up, maybe this is all fake, maybe this is all those moments. The thing that I keep coming back to, not just what I would say is the presence of God in my life, in the providence and how he's woven things together in the story, but is I don't think it's possible for humans to have the self-awareness to know how terrible off we are and how terrible we are in our nature, and then to conceive of an idea that there's a God who loves us that's going to die in our place, walk in skin, look at us from a point of view perspective, and then say, I want in, and I want you in too. So that I've come back to that again and again and again. So my question to you is that a kind of a God that you could ever possibly even consider looking into?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can continue to look into them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Any words of advice you have for us, or anything you would want to say to us?
No.
Scott's got something to say. Go ahead. Yeah.
How, in your own description of your understanding of Jesus and his moral context, how would you compare that to or what would you think of looking at other people who we consider to have high moral standards, like maybe someone like Gandhi or Mother Teresa, or some of the folks in recent history that you can kind of relate to some extent because you've actually seen pictures of these people or have heard their words. It's a Nelson Mandela, someone like that, maybe Martin Luther King. How does that kind of compare in your mind?
How do non-divine moral leaders compare to
Well, you
Christ?
describe Jesus as a moral compass
Teacher,
or
yeah.
a moral, something you like to
Oh,
follow, you think.
oh, is he just? Does he see him as distinct from all these other kinds of more?
I don't know,
like, yeah.
I don't know. If
Okay.
it's just, contrast and compare or whatever, however, just how do you think in your own head in that aspect of,
How do I think about Jesus compared to the other?
yeah, I guess that would be a good way of thinking of it, yeah.
More popular.
More
Older?
Certainly, the influence that Jesus has had has been huge. I mean, there's very few, if any. Well, I think I was just reading up on Islam. I think there's 1.8 billion members of Islam. I don't know how many Christians there are.
About the same.
So
2 billion or something
so-
like that. Yeah.
if not the most influential, one of the most influential people in human history, right up in the top 3 probably, as far as the change, the impact he's had, and the fact that there's something to follow.
Both
which is-
uses and abuses of him.
Yeah. So did I answer the? I don't know if I answered the question.
More influence.
Well, like, I think you meant like on a person level, like Jesus, because Unitarianism, I believe God is God. So do you think Jesus is like a man as a figure or like a God? And if you think him as a man, who would you compare him to with good morals like Gandhi or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to I personally think I haven't seen yet the evidence, so I'm a skeptic. So he's a man.
So Scott's
Yeah.
question was, who's a man that looks like Jesus in your mind, current date, that you can pick out?
I mean, I think he gave a couple of good examples, Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Those would be the ones that probably pop to mind.
He was infallible, by the way.
He was in what?
He slept around.
I heard that. My wife told me that a couple of years ago, and I was shocked.
But anyway, regardless, I wasn't there. I just kind of curious as to what you were thinking on the whole thing.
Yeah, I really liked FDR as a president. We were just in DC a couple weeks ago, and I got an opportunity with the Scouts. We went all around to a couple of the monuments and really tried to immerse myself in that. I thought that, they were all great leaders. Washington, Lincoln, FDR. We saw the Martin Luther King Memorial. I mean, it didn't impact, I think, the kids as much as I would have liked it to. But for me, being like in those monuments and kind of taking a moment to do what the monuments are for, which is to sit and reflect on the lives that they led and how they helped us have the country we have now. I think they were pretty good leaders, some of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I answer the question? I would say.
Bob, actually.
I would say you probably do. I'd say the thing that makes him different is a divine claim. He claimed divinity, and not only that, there's no evidence from any of, whether it's non-biblical literature or biblical literature, of any moral impurity. I'd say those would be the 2 things that would, even from even scholars who don't believe in Christianity could agree with that, I think.
Yep.
So. Well, guys, thank you for all your participation. Thank you for being part of the conversation. And let's give Bob a round of applause. That's awesome. Okay, so come give me a hug. And you can, and then you can sit down. Thanks, buddy.
All right, thank you.